Good morning, Amrit. So good to
Good
see
morning.
you.
Nice to see you.
Hi, Sucheta. How are you?
Hello, Hero. Such a delight.
I know, such a delight. Really, after so long.
After very long.
How are you?
I have to come to college. ये नहीं चलेगा. You can't get away. हाँ.
नहीं, we have
College में बुलाओ फिर canteen में बैठ के to enjoy the food there.
absolutely.
बिल्कुल,
Things have to get normal for us to get back to college. Everything is online mode at the moment. That's it.
Yeah.
That is it. And how have you been?
I'm good. I'm very good.
Good. Good old days we can remember.
Oh, of course. You bet.
Still on online mode, no? JNU also.
So do you have some students also joining in?
Yeah, a lot of them are going. Most of them are here.
Acha, how nice.
Some are students, you know.
Okay, great. Because that's what one misses the most. Those 18 to 21-year-olds, you know, by the time we get them, they are fully mature. Yeah.
Hi, Shrikant. How are you?
Hello.
Hello, Sucheta.
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Another 2 or 3 minutes, then we can join.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just we give them time to.
Shrikant, how's your wife?
She is doing fine, Sucheta. She is all right.
Shama Prasad?
Yes, same place.
Acha.
Morning,
Yes,
Sucheta ma'am. This is OP here.
Arey, OP, kaise ho? Lovely to see everybody.
Thank you, ma'am.
Acha, how's our very dear, how's he doing? Anil Chauhan.
As usual, he is good.
Is he in college?
Hello, Sucheta.
Hi, Sudha. I can't see you,
Morning. How
Sudha.
are you?
मैं ठीक हूँ जरा put on your video, Sudha.
All right. It is just that here's our baby and all that. It's better to put out the video.
नहीं, lovely.
So, all is well?
Everything's good. Thank God for that.
Hey, Chalita,
Thank
we
you.
will sit together in the canteen and have the samosas and some more other delicacies.
You bet, yeah.
Okay.
Morning, Vinita. How are you?
Let's carry on.
Oh, it's so nice to hear and see.
Great, Sucheta. Lovely to have you here.
Vinita, how's your son?
Yeah, he's fine. Thank you. He's fine.
Where is he
now?
Kahan?
Bangalore.
Bangalore.
Yeah.
So what, IT or something else?
No, he is a designer. He's
wow.
a graphic designer.
That's really
From
good.
NIT. Yeah.
So did he, what, Srishti or something else?
NIT Ahmedabad.
Acha, NIT Ahmedabad. Okay.
Yeah.
Utkarsh? Nahin?
Utkarsh. Yeah, I'm so glad you remember him.
Yeah. You know, the children and all the same age and all of us this thing. Sudha, how are your girls?
Yeah. I too always remember. Yeah.
Sudha is a grandmom.
They are
Oh, wow.
both doing well. One is with American Express and the other one is with Google. Yeah.
Arey, wow.
I have a granddaughter too.
Very
and the other one is
nice.
working with
Wonderful.
Google.
Acha.
And
In Delhi or where?
Shrikant. No, one is
Varun and Shrikant are
Delhi,
fine.
American Express. And the other one will be going to Bangalore in January.
Acha. Okay, lovely.
Because of lockdown.
Of
So
course.
I always remember your birthday and the Varun's birthday on the 29th.
Yeah, Varun is on the 27th. And आपका और मेरा एक जैसा होता है ना? We share the same birthday. You and I.
Yeah. 25th.
I still remember that picnic when I was expecting Shrikant, and we were also, all of you were more nervous than I was when we went to Surajkund.
Yeah. Dr. Wirtz had sent us a picture of a freshers party in which Prachi was also there and you two were sitting. Must be in the early 90s. Must be that.
Acha. अजय मुझे भी भेजना.
All right. I will take your number from Nehru and post it to you.
Sure. Absolutely.
Good morning, Sucheta. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. So lovely. All the old faces, voices.
I hope you remember us.
Of course, I remember Nehru. You were so active and socially and politically also a little bit. I remember very well. And our boys were also once applying in. They were the same batch, and Varun and your son, and we were together in the university at that time.
At that time, yes. I do remember that also. Yes.
Looking for admission, yeah.
Yeah.
Everything's good with you?
Yeah. It's perfectly fine. Yes.
Lovely.
Yeah.
So only a few more years to go for most of us. Just 2 more years for me to retire.
Okay. But you are doing so well, and we are so happy to see your progress. So congratulations.
Thank you. Kya progress?
I know it's great fun.
But yeah, it's been good.
On the Facebook that this person has completed the PhD with you. This person has. It's always there. So it's such a pleasure to see that. Your students acknowledging you all the time.
No, that's really good. Yeah.
Could we start? Tejasvi, are you ready?
Yes, ma'am. I'll just take 30 more seconds, ma'am. I'll just read. Good morning, teachers. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm so sorry, ma'am. I had this connectivity issue.
Is it possible for you to switch on your camera?
Yes, ma'am. I just turned it on, ma'am. Am I visible?
Yeah, thank you.
Right. So, ma'am, we can start any moment, right?
You can start, Tejasvi.
Okay. So, good morning to one and all present here. I am Tejasvi Singh, and on behalf of Itihāsa, the History Association of Delhi College of Arts and Commerce, and IQAC, I extend a very warm welcome to Professor Sucheta Mahajan, the convener of IQAC, all our professors, seniors, and friends, to the second activity of this academic session. For protocol remarks, I request the audience to ping the lecture and ask questions in the chat box itself. The questions will be taken up at the end of the lecture. And before the lecture begins, please allow me to introduce the speaker of today, Professor Sucheta Mahajan. Ms. Mahajan is professor and former chairperson at the Center for Historical Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Ma'am is a former chairperson of the Archives on Contemporary History in JNU. Earlier, ma'am also used to teach at DCAC itself. Ma'am was the Gillespie visiting professor at the College of. Ma'am was fellow at the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla, a fellow at Rockefeller Foundation's Bellagio Center, visiting professor at Meissen des Sciences de Homs, Paris, fellow of the Trinity Long Room Hub at the Arts and Humanities Research Institute, Trinity College, Dublin, Ireland. Ma'am's publications include Towards Freedom, Documents on India's Freedom Struggle 1947, Part 1 and 2. She was the editor here. They were published in 2013 and 15 respectively. Another book is Independence and Partition, The Erosion of Colonial Power in India, 2000. And India Chandra, which was published in 1988. Ma'am's areas of interest include the history and politics of the 20th century, movements for social change, connected histories of independence and partition, and the practice of oral and public history. Professor Mahajan, we are humbled to have you with us, and without further ado, we welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Tejasvi, for that very warm introduction. Thank you, Dr. Nehru Azadi, Dr. Shrikant Pandey, for inviting me to flag off this very important series on our freedom struggle. It's so important that we are here today, just a few days before our Independence Day, and trying to look at what was the legacy of our freedom struggle. And this was a topic which Dr. Azadi was very keen on, and we agreed readily on this topic, right? I want to thank my colleagues, both in history, whom I've already spoken to. Then I'm so delighted to see Meera Malhan. I've spoken to Vinita Chaturvedi. All the memories come back. So I was telling Nehru that, this is a lecture, or I have to come in person when the university opens, when the pandemic is hopefully a part of our lives, and we can, meet a little and work on these things. So thank you so much. I had a glorious, innings in DCAC for 15 years, from 89 to 2004 or 5, I think, 5. And it was, we were the best history department in the university. There was no doubt about it. People used to come and ask for it. Used to be like a slip those days. Please allow us to attend your classes. And they would come from Hindu and Stephens and from all the, big campus colleges. And we had great teachers, Amrut, Nehru, Sudha, many others, and I only remember one incident which somehow just came to my mind, and I have to share this with you. This is how our relationship was with our students in DCAC. This is very bright young boy. I love these 18 to 21-year-olds. I really miss them in JNU, because हिंदी में कहते हैं ना, हमारे पास जो घड़ा आता है वो पका हुआ आता है. और जब कॉलेज में हम, when we deal with the 18-year-olds, you can shape them, and that is really so special. So there was this boy, very wide-eyed, obviously, quite impressed by what was happening in the class, and he came out and said, "Ma'am, tell me, how did you end up doing history? Did you, like me, did you also get a 3rd division in college, school?" So I said, "Why do I look like, I've got a 3rd division?" So, and then I stumped him even further by saying that actually, I did a BA honors in economics. And then I was, my passion was history. So I, shared this there. So poor fellow, he was so flummoxed, he said, and he had started this interrogation on the staircase. We used to be on the top floor. And when he was coming down and next to the banister, and he just stopped, and he said, "Ma'am, can I ask you a very personal question?" So I said, "Well, depends on how personal it is." So that was the type of, this thing. The second joke I have to tell before I go on to my lecture is that, in the beginning, because we had just set up our history department as an honors department. So naturally, in the first batch, we were all appointed then, Nehru, Sudha, and I, and Prachi. And when we developed as an honors department, so naturally there was only a few students, who came in the first year. There was no 2nd or 3rd year for us. And somebody, I think, described us as 6 characters in search of an author. There was this play or book, And I used to always say, I used to say, oh, we are 6 teachers in search of a student. And sometimes when we would go to the cafeteria and look for a student, and if we found one, we would say, okay, run to the mini market and round up some students from there and bring them, because they're obviously there. So that was DCAC. It was great being there. So anyway, to move to the topic of my talk today, you might wonder, the one thing that you might wonder about the topic is, why have I brought in Legacy of Freedom and Partition, right? Normally when we are celebrating Azadi ka Amrut Mahotsav, तो फिर आजादी की ही बात करें, फिर उसमें partition क्यों ला रहे हैं? Partly it is because my life's work, in a manner of speaking, has been on the intertwined history of independence and partition. I always felt that the two of them, the struggle for India's independence and the struggle, and then of course the Pakistan movement and Pakistan. If you remember, when going back to your school textbooks, they were in separate chapters. One story of communalism and partition started maybe with Syed Ahmad Khan in the 19th century, and it ended with partition, mankind talking about, and creation of Pakistan. And there was another story, the story of independence, which started with the Congress or a little before, and that of course ended with the achievement of freedom. And when I wrote my book, Independence and Partition, Erosion of Colonial Power in India, some 20 years ago, I was still in DCAC, I realized that the two processes were very much intermingled by this time. And that actually partition was, in a way, the limited success of the freedom struggle. That is, or let me put it differently, freedom and partition were two sides of the same coin, in the way that one represented the success of the freedom struggle and the other represented the failure. The failure to draw in the Muslims into this united struggle, whereas the freedom struggle was successful in drawing in enough people in order to be able to demand from the British that now we are a nation, right? So a nation, but a limited nation, a nation which was, if we look at the concept of nation in the making, a nation which was not yet made. And in fact, it was by the 40s, perhaps it was almost in the unmaking. Let me begin also talking a little bit about how the whole issue of freedom and partition have been looked at when anniversaries come up. It will interest you to know that when the 50th anniversary of partition came up, one of our very fine scholars, Ashish Nandi, made a very important point. He said, how is it that we are only talking about freedom and we are not talking about partition? Gyanendra Pandey and others also talked about how the celebratory anthems of freedom had drowned out the dirges, the sad songs of partition. In fact, for 25 years, with this new looking at this period, partition became the leitmotif of the writings and discussions on 1947. If we were commemorating 1947, it was with now a partition museum in Amritsar. There wasn't as good a museum on Jallianwala Bagh over there. So the partition story, according to me, in the last 25 years, seems to have eclipsed or overwhelmed the story of independence, just as the independence story had eclipsed and drowned out the partition story in the first 50 years. And I believe that India, on the cusp of turning 75, it's time enough now to move beyond either freedom or partition. It's now time that we look at it from a vantage point of an intertwined history of independence and partition. In fact, I would say that we need to focus much more now on the making of the new polity, economy, and society that took place just after 1947, which involved the fashioning of new structures, but with instruments which had been fashioned during the freedom struggle, as we would see today. This paradigm or perspective of transition from colonial rule to post-independence is informed not only with a concern with independence and communalism and like issues, but also with issues of citizenship, with aspirations for democracy, with the entire issue of inclusion and discrimination, and last but not least, the issue of identity, pivoting around gender, caste, and language. I believe that this perspective of transition can help us to move away from the old frameworks of continuity and change with which we have looked at this period, and rather this will help us to recognize the transformation which was marked by 15th August 1947, not only in the field of politics, but more importantly, in the socio-economic arena. And this transformation that took place again is one in which the legacy of the freedom struggle in taking up these issues of the socio-economic arena becomes very evident. Just a little going back to the Congress. The Congress, as you know, was not only a party, it was an umbrella organization. Some people have called it a platform, under which different strands of anti-colonial politics coexisted. These strands represented distinct ideological perspectives. You could be a socialist, you could be a capitalist or a communist, but they shared a commitment to an idea of India. An idea of India which was made up of elements like democracy, of course, but equally important,
Not audible.
Sucheta ma'am, can you hear us?
There seems to be a connectivity issue.
Right, right ma'am.
Give her a call. Is it at our end or her end?
No, I think she has left. She'll rejoin. I think she's left the meeting. She'll have to rejoin.
Just call her. That must have happened accidentally. बाहर ही हो गई.
agree.
There is a connectivity issue. She says she's connecting again through the phone. She says, give me a minute.
क्या कॉल नहीं लग रही सुचेता को?
No, I've spoken with her. She says she has left. She's joining again through the phone.
Must have happened
Connectivity issue at her end.
Okay. उस स्पीकर ही बाहर हो गया.
ये ऑनलाइन में होता रहता है अमृत, यही तो प्रॉब्लम है ऑनलाइन के साथ.
वैसे कोई फायदा नहीं है ऑनलाइन का ना, तो कनेक्शन ही नहीं हो पा रहा.
कई बार तो क्लास नहीं ना, many times it go for the classes and suddenly you find that there is. अच्छा, she has come back.
वो ना आपको पता कि कौन इंटरेस्टेड है, कितना बोलना है.
Hi. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll try and get back. So that this idea of India was composed of elements like democracy, secularism, sovereignty, a pro-poor orientation in economic policies, and non-alignment in world politics. With the coming of Gandhi began the process of transforming the Congress into a mass party with a constitution and foreigner membership. The non-cooperation movement had taken the struggle along the path of mass disobedience with boycott of legislatures, courts, schools, and colleges. Gandhi had given the call for Swaraj in 1 year. Intertwined with the Khilafat movement, which protested against the dissolution of the Caliphate or the Khilafat, the non-cooperation movement witnessed unity between Hindus and Muslims on a hitherto unprecedented scale. With Gandhiji, the Indian people truly came into their own. They flocked to the movement in multitudes, filling the prisons, swarming the beaches to make salt, picketing foreign shops, drawing the attention of the world to the coming together of the people of India. More than anything, Gandhiji helped them overcome their awe, indeed their fear of the Britisher. Jawaharlal Nehru, his young disciple, evocatively wrote about this in Discovery of India, about the coming of Gandhi. With Nehru and Bose, the idea of India assumed a shape which it did not have earlier. Purna Azadi, or complete independence, a socialist vision for free India, land for the peasants, workers' rights to be secured, women to get equality, and adult franchise at a time when it had not yet been achieved in the West. And even when it was achieved after a separate struggle known as the suffragette movement. By the mid-30s, we find that socialist ideas had spread. I just mentioned the role of the peasants and workers, and Kisan Sabhas came up, trade unions came up, and there was even talk of collective affiliation of these bodies to the Congress, changing its entire nature. After independence, Jawaharlal Nehru assumed the mantle of leading the country, but it was along with Sardar Patel that he was able to do this very successfully. Of the trio, Gandhiji, Nehru, and Patel, Gandhiji had been assassinated in 1948, and Patel passed away from ill health by 1950. The socialists had also left the Congress by then, and the Gandhians had retired to their ashrams after Bapu's assassinations. In the first general elections, which were based on adult franchise, the Congress party won a huge victory. Nehru made the election campaign a referendum on popular support to his policies. The point here is that Nehru was, and the Congress party was not winning the first election on the basis of what they had done in those 4 years or 5 years. it was as the party of the freedom struggle that he got a stamp on his policies, because the policies that were taken up, as we will just see, were inspired by and were rooted in the freedom struggle. Now, the founders of the Indian Republic, and here, of course, the whole issue of the Constitution comes up. The founders committed themselves to two major changes or innovations which of historical significance in the process of nation building. One was the building of a democratic society among a people who were illiterate, a very big task. And the second, and something which had not been done in history so far, undertaking economic development within a democratic political structure. This last is very, very important. China could undertake an economic development, but there was no democracy. You know, as Deng famously said, it doesn't matter the color of the cat as long as it can catch the mice. So our founding fathers realized that these objectives, that is the building of such a republic and the kind of economic development that was being initiated, required a large social consensus. And how does this social consensus come about? How do you create democratic forms through which people can be consulted? The vision of the freedom struggle was there. On that, there was a social consensus. It was not around extreme communism or extreme socialism, no. But pro-poor, yes, that everybody agreed on. The National Planning Committee, which was initiated by the Congress, or the Bombay Plan, which was initiated by the capitalists, they shared this vision of pro-poor. But obviously they were at loggerheads when it came to the issue of socialism or capitalism. When we look at the Constitution of India, we are surprised by how many of the clauses, particularly when we look at the fundamental rights section, for which there was a separate committee which had been set up, whether we talk about freedom of association, freedom of speech, freedom of press, other civil liberties, these were highlighted as early as 1931 in what is known as the Karachi Congress. The Karachi Resolutions can be called the bedrock of the Constitution of India. Very often in the books we read on the Constitution of India, the 1935 Government of India Act is highlighted. To my mind, the Nehru report and the Karachi Congress resolutions, they were more important as the bedrock rather than the Government of India Act of 1935. What is important here is to recognize that these values which came in, brought into the Constitution, these were not a gift of colonialism. These were the shared values of the freedom struggle for which people had struggled. And there was a shared vision around it. Without being misunderstood in any way, some scholars have pointed out that therefore our democracy is ebullient, it is a strong democracy in contrast to Pakistan, where the Muslim League never achieved, or the Muslim League did not function as a democratic party. It was a party of landlords, and the vision remained a different vision. Even when it became a mass party in the 1940s, it was a kind of ragtag coalition You did not have the kind of functioning that the Congress did. Whereas in the Congress, the democratic functioning was something which was part and parcel of the Congress. It was part of the constitution of the Congress, and from there it was picked up and brought into other forms and other institutions in free India. Another challenge was, how do you promote industrialization in a country which is agriculturally dominant? How do you break out of the mold of colonial style economic growth and develop an economy which was based on heavy industry by following a strategy of self-reliant economic growth, emerging from a critique of the colonial model of development, which was actually not a model of development. It was really a colonial model of underdevelopment. Here again, interestingly, we go back to the Karachi Resolution of 1931 about the role of the state in the economy. Let me remind you here that this resolution was drafted by Jawaharlal Nehru, but moved by Gandhi. And the session in which this happened was presided over by Sardar Patel. Why am I emphasizing this? I'm emphasizing this because there is a tendency today, and you are all aware of it in social media and politics and all over, to appropriate Sardar Patel, to separate him from the Congress and appropriate him by the ruling forces, etc. And, so Nehru is, and Gandhi, and even Gandhi is seen as a Rashtrapita who can be appropriated. So Nehru is the only person who is the one who is believed to have done all that went wrong with the Congress and politics at that time. It's very important to remember that they all worked in close collaboration with each other. The National Planning Committee and the Bombay Plan I've just mentioned, again, these are institutions of the 1930s. They provide the blueprint for the planning of the Indian economy after independence. The Indian economy grew over 7% in the years 1950 to 1965. This is the period of the 3 5-year plans. Again, if you look at agriculture, the whole issue of abolition of zamindari, for example, the issue of tenancy reforms. Look back a little to the 1930s. These were the very reforms and the very demands which were taken up by the peasant organizations and the Kisan Sabhas in this period, in the 1930s and 1940s. So the legacy of the freedom struggle in the field of economic reforms is something which is very, very clear. Let's take a look at our foreign policy. Again, India developed a policy of independence and equidistant from the two blocks. And it was here again, it was very important that we had an independent economy. That independent economy which developed allowed us a flexibility, allowed us a leverage such that over time we were able to bring down the share of foreign trade with the United Kingdom down from 45% in 1947 to just 20% in 1977, in 30 years. So the independent economy was the base on which India could maintain a non-aligned foreign policy. India, as you know, was disinclined to be part of the Anglo-American bloc right from the beginning, particularly the treaty organizations, NATO, CENTO, CETO, etc., because America and England were associated in its mind, in the mind of the Indian leadership, with it's our history of colonial rule and exploitation. A very interesting meeting took place in New Delhi in 1947, which reflected Pan-Asian unity and diversity. It was a call to Asia to come together and assume the leadership of the world. The Americans and the British in this period were apprehensive about the likelihood of Soviet influence over India, and they tried their best to counter this by building up an alternative bloc which extended from Pakistan up to the what was then called West Asia. In reaction to this, in separation from this, Nehru, along with Tito and Nasser, came together to give leadership to the non-aligned movement, which represented a powerful challenge to the established international order. I don't know if you are aware of this, but I found it very interesting that there was a foreign policy cell or a foreign policy department in the Indian National Congress, headed in the mid-30s by Jawaharlal Nehru. In fact, it used to operate out of Swaraj Bhavan in Allahabad, and there were many, young minds which were who were associated with this foreign policy thing. So the anti-fascism of the Congress in the late 1930s, where Nehru and company felt they were even willing to go along with Britain at that time when it came to anti-fascism, because they saw Hitler as a big enemy. Gandhi's opposition to nuclear armaments in the world, to the atomic bomb, Nehru's support to the Spanish Civil War, and to other progressive movements the world over. Again, there is a very interesting legacy of the freedom struggle, which continues in the post-independence period. Very often you will find the unity of the country presented in some writings as the legacy of colonialism. I was shocked that even Perry Anderson, whom all of us here know from history, who has written these wonderful books, which we relied on, passages from antiquity to feudalism and lineages of an absolute state. They were really our Bibles for those courses on social formations and history of the modern West that we taught in those years. Even Perry Anderson, in his book, Indian Ideology, the 3 essays that he has written, says that the idea of India was a European and not a local invention. And he credits the British for uniting the subcontinent into a single political realm for the first time in its history, quote unquote. In fact, Anderson reiterates the British claim that their role in India was one of unification of India, one of the blessings of British government. You've heard the phrase, I'm sure, Angrezi Raj ki barkatein. So unity was believed to be Angrezi Raj ki barkatein. Of course, we know better. Irfan Habib, in a very interesting article and a talk that he gave on nation building in India, reminds us that the conception of Hind as a political and cultural entity predates the coming of the British by a few centuries. And he even reminds us that it was the Persians who coined the term Hind, and the famous 13th century poet Amir Khusro, who abundantly praised the land of Hind in his poem Nu'e-Sifr. Going back to the freedom struggle, then, we can describe it as a process of nation in the making, in which diverse communities, classes, castes, social groups made up this nation. Each group, when it came into the struggle, brought with it its own genius, its own individuality into this collective struggle. Of course, this also meant a challenge to the unity of the nation, because the collective creation of this nation made it a many-splendored think it was a variegated nation. And this diversity was used and exploited by the colonial powers to divide and rule, and eventually, as we know, very sadly, to divide and quit. Despite this imposed partition, however, the legacy of the national movement was strong enough. And I always underline this point with my students. It was strong enough to resist the demand that made by communal forces at that time that India should be declared a Hindu state along the lines of Pakistan's theocratic state model. In fact, separate electorates were clearly out in the Constituent Assembly. And here partition played a positive role in a certain sense, that is, Sardar Patel and others were able to point out that we had suffered because of separate electorates. Separate electorates had encouraged communalism and eventually led to the partition of the country, and we must not make this mistake again. Hence the Constitution laid the foundations for a democratic polity which enshrined unity in diversity. It was not just a catchword, but a reality. It became a living reality. In 1947, Gandhiji, who, as you know, stood up for the rights of Muslims. He went on a fast unto death a few days in the middle of 1947, January, to ensure that Muslims are not treated as second-class citizens. He stood up for secular India. It was only when pledges came in from the Hindu leaders of Delhi that he was persuaded to withdraw his fast. But within a few days, he was felled by those who had a different idea of India, a Hindu Rashtra, to whose creation they saw him as a stumbling block. I don't have the time to talk about this, but I have written on this elsewhere. The point I'm making here was, yes, the Congress conceded Pakistan because there was no help for it at that point, but Gandhi appealed to people to not accept division in their hearts. And he always said that, look, this division, like the division between an elder brother and a brother, and the time will come, he hoped, when the British will go away, and then there will be a union of hearts. Let us not also forget one thing, that the two-nation theory, which is very often attributed only to the Muslim League, is something which was also subscribed to by Savarkar. And Savarkar, as we know, was an ideologue of the Hindu Mahasabha. Gandhi was at pains to point out always that Muslims were not primarily outsiders. There may be a few Turani, Irani, etc. from outside, or Turks, but most Indian Muslims were converts, and hence Muslims and Hindus were of common ethnic stock. The politics, the Ansaris in Bihar could be nationalist and secular, whereas the UP Talukdars could be behind the Muslim League. None of the politics was only because of being Muslim, but it was because they saw the Congress as threatening their economic interest. I'm talking about the UP Talukdars over here. Also do remember that the Indian Muslims did not vote fully with their feet for Pakistan. Many of them stayed back and found themselves better off in a pluralist India than they would have been in Pakistan. One person who many of you know who made this choice was Professor Irfan Habib, the rest of whose family departed for Pakistan, but he in recent years when he has been talking about his own life and work, he has underlined this point that he made this choice and he has never regretted it. In fact, tomorrow he's completing 90 years, and there is going to be, please check online, there is going to be an online symposium on the 12th at 6:30 p.m. Those of you who would like to join this, it's available for everyone, celebrating Irfan Habib at achieving 90 years. So many Muslims staying back, and if this had not happened, well, God forbid, then we would have adopted more of a fundamentalist profile. Now, moving to the legacy of partition. When we think of the legacy of partition, the first thing that comes to mind is the Kashmir issue. Second thing which comes to our mind is possibly cross-border terrorism, maybe in Kashmir. Maybe we might remember the Khalistani movement. And if we look in the east, we find a very jagged border there with so many conclaves jutting in and out so as to make that particular border virtually unpoliceable. Now, these, of course, are unresolved matters which emanated from the partition of the country. But more than that, I would say the unfortunate legacy of partition is the prevailing communal divide in the country. This, friends, did not naturally flow from the pre-partition communalism or from the massacres which accompanied the partition. It would interest you to know that the communal forces and the people who were supporting the communal forces, especially the Hindu communal forces, in the time after partition, when Hindus were thrown out of West Pakistan and of East Pakistan, people had turned against the Congress. They were seen as weak, and they were seen as having sacrificed the interests of the Hindus. In those the year of 1947-48, when the cries rang out, Gandhi Murdabad, Nehru Murdabad, Patel Murdabad, at that time, there was a groundswell of popular opinion in favor of the RSS and the Hindu Mahasabha. But, friends, Gandhiji's assassination shocked the nation. And people said, oh my God, this is not what we wanted. We only, supported this because we felt that the Congress was appeasing the Muslims. They bought into that propaganda, but no, not assassination of Gandhiji. In fact, Nehru put it very well. He said, India has suffered two grievous blows in recent times. And the first, he said, was the partition of the country. And the second, he said, was the assassination of Gandhiji. But as I said, people were shocked. And for the first almost 20 years, we find that there were hardly any major communal riots in India. It was only with Jamshedpur, and then, of course, a lot in the UP belt that this became quite common from the 1960s onwards. But it took a long time for communalism to reach or to become a mass phenomenon. And it is only in the 80s that Hindu communal forces started to become a viable electoral political force. And then it is only by the turn of the century that they were able to stake a claim to form governments, and governments which, in fact, as in Gujarat, we saw in 2002, very quickly showed their fascist colors. The leadership of the freedom struggle here, it's very important. If the legacy of partition was communalism, then the legacy of the partition was also how to meet the communal challenge. The leadership set an example on how to do this. Nehru led from the front in suppressing communal riots in Bihar in 1946, where Hindu peasants who had been provoked by news coming in from Noakhali turned upon their Muslim neighbors. Nehru warned Hindus. He rushed to Bihar and to the villages, and he said, I am going to order firing and even bombardment from the air. When Churchill read about bombardment from the air, he was very amused, because he said, here is this party which criticized us for the bombardment from the air in the 42 movement. Some years ago, I had edited the memoirs of H.M. Patel, a senior civil servant, in fact, the highest in the ICS at that time, who related how Patel and Nehru and ICS officials worked together to restore peace in Delhi in September 1947. September was a very cruel month when it looked to Nehru and others that the Hindu communal groups, helped by the Akali groups and by the princes in the north of India, the Sikh princes, as well as Bharatpur and Gwalior and Alwar, the state was under threat from this organized thing, and there could almost have been a coup. Nehru, after September, comes down very heavily on the Hindu Mahasabha and the RSS, because he believes and he argues and he shows to the people that Hindu communalism is a very serious threat to the secular fabric of the nascent Indian nation. You will be interested to know that it is not only Nehru who did that. Sardar Patel was the person, and I've quoted this in my book, where I'm just quoting one line. He said, there is no doubt in my mind that an extreme section of the Hindu Mahasabha was involved in this conspiracy. Which conspiracy? The conspiracy to murder Gandhiji. And he went on to say the activities of the RSS constituted a clear threat to the existence of the government and the state. So this whole picture that Patel was pro-Hindu and Nehru was pro-Muslim, we have to rethink many of these categories. It was not only the leadership which set an example for meeting the communal challenge head-on. The more I read about the partition riots, the more I come across ordinary people who stood out. That is, people who came out to help, to rescue, to give a shoulder to people to lean on. Some names were, of course, well known. Mahavir Tyagi, congressman from Dehradun, who protected Muslims from rioters. Gandhi, of course, Mountbatten, as you know, described him as a one-man boundary force. But there were so many other stories, and we need to collect these stories, and we need to publish these stories, not only the stories of blood and war and killing, the ones that we have already in our stories, in our histories. The perspective of nation in the making then, as I said earlier, is one which helps us to understand the making of our nation in the years after 1947. That is, this is an ongoing process. Unity gets consolidated, it gets challenged, we have disintegration, we have challenges, and importantly, there is a conscious effort which is needed to keep this unity going. And this unity, as I said earlier, is not a homogeneous unity. It does not get threatened by diversity. Whether it is an identity around region or around language or tribe or religion, these identities do not threaten or question the pan-Indian unity. They go along with it. In fact, it's very interesting if you look at the history of linguistic movements in India, how granting of autonomy to linguistic groups has in fact strengthened unity. Go back to 1920, the Constitution of the Congress, and very interestingly, the provinces which were recognized at that time, the states, these were not the presidencies which were imposed by colonial rule. These were these were the states like Utkal, Karnataka, Kerala, Maharashtra, Mahakaushal. So it was the regional and the linguistic identities which were being recognized. Also, when it comes to the issue of a national language, you saw what happened to Pakistan with the imposition of Urdu. There was an upheaval in East Pakistan, which culminated in the creation of Bangladesh. In a multilingual country like India, if any one language had been foisted, even if it was a language it was spoken by a lot of people, this would have been disastrous. And it's very important that this was recognized. The Congress leadership under Nehru kept this issue in abeyance, and they gave due recognition to linguistic groups. So we have so many languages, official languages, and English and Hindi have emerged as official language / link languages across the country. Again, what I'm underlining here is that this identity around language goes back to the 1920 Constitution. Similarly, if we look at the concept of secularism that we have in India today, our whole concept about equidistance between religious communities. We don't have the Western concept of separation of the state from religion, the church and the state being separate. No. Our state is in fact committed not only to equidistance, but to upholding the cultural and religious rights of communities. And it is committed to promoting communal harmony. Where does this come from? This does not come from the top of anybody's head. This goes back to the freedom struggle and the spectrum of unity across communities, classes, and castes, which was almost like a kaleidoscope. Let me end today, by highlighting the very serious threats that we are facing today to the values of democracy, civil liberties, secularism, equality of all citizens, which the people had fought for during the anti-colonial struggle and which we had nurtured for more than a half a century after independence. The founding fathers of our revolution had a vision of modern India which drew upon the historical legacy of diversity, not only from the time of the freedom struggle, but from going back to the centuries through the experiences of people. You know about Hindus and Muslims with their shared sources of tradition. I'm not talking only about Sufis, but there would be so many communities. Khushwant Singh, even in Train to Pakistan, talks about it, how in his small village that he talks about, there are common ancestors, there are common peers whom are worshipped, etc. So the civilizational values of the freedom struggle were enshrined in our constitution and then made a living reality in our country are today threatened by forces of different kinds. And these forces are those forces which did not participate in the struggle against colonialism. These were the loyalist forces, which also overlapped with the communal forces. And we will find that it is this spectrum of forces which continues to have a problem today with the kind of nation state and with the kind of very broad, inclusive cultural underpinnings of our nation state that emerged from the freedom struggle. The idea of India projected by these forces is very different from the idea of India which has been projected and made a living reality in our country for the last 75 years. The problem with legacies, friends, is that they do not survive forever. They need replenishment, they need renewal. And I think at 75 years, it is time to renew not only our vows to the ideals and values of the freedom struggle, but to take a new look, a re-look at this freedom struggle, to see what are those sources which we can harness for our people today, so that the legacy of unity in diversity does not remain merely lip service. It can gain a fresh life. It's important that Gandhi is not just reduced to his glasses, being the logo of the Swachh Bharat campaign. It is important that what Gandhi did, he always said, my life is my message. It's important that we, the young people particularly, rediscover Gandhi, read Gandhi, rediscover the Gandhi who makes sense to them. I would like to, of course, end with this exhortation. Maybe I've taken a little more time. That is the part of the, I think, collateral damage, I think, that as teachers, we always end up doing, because, once you start off and take off, then there's no stopping you, particularly when there are no students in front. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this very informative lecture. We now sure understand why and how independence and partition are indifferentiable. So now we can move on to the question and answer session. And before my fellow friends and seniors ask questions, I would request the professors, if you want to talk to ma'am, if the professors have anything to say to ma'am.
I think just you can take the questions.
Right, ma'am. Ma'am, the first question is from O.P. Singh sir. Sir asked, why do you think the founding fathers of our constitution erred that led to the growth of divisive and communal forces in our country over the period? Ma'am, do you want me to repeat?
Why do you think the founding fathers?
The founding fathers of our
It's not
constitution.
why, it's where.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Right, sorry. Where do you? Yes, ma'am. I'll just repeat. Where do you think the founding fathers of our constitution erred? I am assuming this is pronounced as erred. That led to the growth of divisive and communal forces in our country over the period.
Okay, I don't really think that a lot of the responsibility for the divisive politics and society that we are stuck with today, I don't see that much responsibility can be placed at the door of those who made our constitution. I think a lot of this is the creation of the last 30, 40 years. As I said, we did very well in the first 20 years. We did very well in the first 20 years on various fronts. And I think there were one or two issues, I would say, where there was some amount of anxiety, for example, about should we pick up issues which affect the social reforms among Muslims, for example. So, Hindu Code Bill was taken up. There was because Jawaharlal Nehru felt more secure about pushing forward social reform among Hindus. So I think very problem with the partition, that is the absence of a progressive Muslim middle class intelligentsia which was behind national causes. And then whatever intelligentsia was there, some of it got divided, went to Pakistan. So there wasn't a group, there wasn't a very strong group among Muslims who could take the leadership in this. So when it comes to issues, as I said, like legislation, Hindu Code Bill, inheritance issues, there I can see that somewhere the government, was a bit hesitant because they didn't have that support. But on the whole, I think that the makers of the Constitution, where it comes to citizenship rights, where it comes to equality and the issue of discrimination, for example, even the caste issue is taken up quite early. I think it's very important that separate electorates are not accepted. I think this was a very big thing. Imagine if we had separate electorates. That would have been like, in a way, creating the ground for another partition. So I would say that the founding fathers did what they had to pretty well, given their limitations. It was a country which was just coming out of partition. Very difficult. So many million refugees who had to be rehabilitated, etc. And in the middle of that, you don't have any friends in the world. You are trying to have an independent foreign policy. You are trying to build an independent economy. It's a very uphill task. Very uphill task.
Thank you, ma'am.
Right, ma'am. So, ma'am, the second question is from Keshav Bansal. He says, while as per the political history, independence of India from the British is marked by a date, August 15, 1947. If one looks at the event and process of independence through a socio-cultural lens, the event is not situated within the confines of the aforementioned date. Rather, I would argue for the post-colony, the process of independence merely began on this date and has yet to reach fruition, given that though politically sovereign, socially and culturally colonialism persists. So the question is, if it is at all possible for India to become independent by way of a decolonial framework, and whether it is ever desirable and feasible, given that colonial system and ideas brought forth though it are deeply ingrained in our society and cultural institution to an extent where the line is blurred. And there's a second part also. Do you want to take it right now, or should I have to answer this?
Let me take this. He's talking about decolonization. Well, one issue is very
appointment ये है और 27 जुलाई 1998 को PBS में ना.
Amrut ma'am, can you please mute yourself?
One issue is there. One issue is that, yes, we have not decolonized fully. And here, Nambar Singh Ji, the Hindi critic, has written a very good article called Decolonizing the Indian Mind. And even today we find that we lose our best scholars, our best IIT graduates, our best doctors, our best social science graduates. We lose them to the West. Very few come back. So the hold of colonialism intellectually on our minds, on our thoughts, anything which comes with a stamp from Chicago, from Cambridge, has more currency than if it comes from Delhi University, or even forget Burdwan or somewhere else. So this is a very big issue that we have to contend with, and it's an effort that we really need to make. The first part was about the socio-economic destructuring, about how that date is not marked by 15th August. Now, we can't have a date for socio-economic restructuring, but here again, I think it's interesting that beginning as early as the Constituent Assembly, issues like, for example, abolition of untouchability, temple entry, they are taken up in the very first ministries in 1946-47. Legislation is passed. Abolition of zamindari. It's, for example, if you read A Suitable Boy, Vikram Seth's novel, what Vikram Seth, being a creative writer and, having the kind of literary and sensitivity to change that he has, he is able to add a third dimension to independence and partition. And that is the socio-economic change, the passing of the feudal order, the tawayas, the landowners, and the legislation. I would really, it's not a great film, but I would recommend that you take a look at the TV series which has been made on Vikram Seth's A Suitable Boy, recently, because it tells you or highlights that second aspect, that socio-economic revolution. So I agree with you that if we had to look for a date for that, then of course that would not be a date or turning point. There would be many dates in the period of beginning from the late 1940s and going on till, it wouldn't even stop with the 1960s. As I said, then of course we are back to the perspective of a nation in the making. Thank you. Very important point being highlighted about the socio-economic part.
Right, ma'am. Ma'am, there was another part, another question asked by Keshav only. So, what do you make of the Commonwealth, which India continues to take part with, where India continues to take part with, and English Queen is the figurehead of it. So, does the institution not convey a nostalgia for British Raj? Ma'am, that is the question.
What's your name? What's the name?
Ma'am, Keshav Bansal has asked this question.
Anyway, one question, Keshav, absolutely welcome them. See, the Commonwealth, also, the Commonwealth includes countries like Australia. Why are we in the Commonwealth? A very good question. I also asked this question in my book many years ago, and the answer I came up with was that when India is turning independent, we have said very clearly since 1930, हमें पूर्ण आज़ादी चाहिए. We want complete independence. We are no longer satisfied with dominion status. Okay? If you're in a Commonwealth, you're a Dominion. So, the Congress in 1947 accepted being in the Commonwealth as a kind of transitional agreement which will take it through the period till the Constitution of India was promulgated in 1950. That was the idea. Otherwise, how could we carry on the basis of the 1935 Government of India Act unless we were able to accept Dominion? But a big concession was made. We could not accept the king or queen as the head of we could not pay homage to them. How could our president, who is a sovereign in a republic, how can he pay homage to, or how can he be part of, be under the king or the queen? So the concession made by Britain was that India will say that the oath or whatever they say, that we will be part of the Commonwealth and we accept the king or whatever as the head of the Commonwealth. So the monarchy part was separated from there to accept or accommodate the republican aspirations of free India. Okay? Taking the answer to the present situation, later on now, as you know, India's being in the Commonwealth doesn't mean very much today. It only helps us in some ways, like we have Commonwealth scholarships, we get some special status in that when it comes to government scholarships in Britain, etc. But it's very clear now that we are not part of the Commonwealth in terms of what we may call a military alliance. The British had wanted us to be part of a treaty alliance, a military alliance, so that they could use our Andaman and Nicobar Islands as a base for fueling their ships when they were going from Aden to Singapore. So they had a different idea, we had a different idea, and it just suited us when we were not aligned to not be part of the US bloc, to be part of a broad kind of thing. So it's continued. But as I said, with very little meaning today, except that learning English has, not that we can't do it without the Commonwealth, but part of the ethos today in India that has helped us in some ways in being right at the forefront, let's say, of the IT, taking advantage of the whole IT revolution and business processing, etc., etc. So there are many advantages of English. So that is all that it means here today.
Right, ma'am. So, ma'am, taking up the last question from Saurabh. Ma'am, the question is that partition survived through several decades, pointing out the popular appeal amongst the masses. If religion and communalism played a role back in 1947, how did this situation become a new normal? And do we see any form of resolution to a quote-unquote limited success or failure of the freedom movement in the 21st century?
It's a very difficult question. Thank you for asking it. When we were young, our parents did not talk to us about what they went through when they, like my family was a refugee family, they came from Lahore and in 1947. They never talked to us because they believed that there was a dream of free India, that free India, there'll be modernization and all these old type of ideologies, chauvinism, communalism, activism, these are all old-fashioned ideologies. These will disappear with economic development and modernization. Sadly, that did not happen. Modernization brought its own pressures such that some of the states which were the most modernized and most developed, like Gujarat, ended up the ones being most communally polarized. In a contradictory way, a state like Bihar, which may not be the foremost among indicators of development, but has certainly been a little more immune or a little more less part of the whole communal divisiveness, right? But then Bihar has had its share of divisiveness when it has come to caste. Okay, so it's a very complex question. Very difficult to say where we go from here, but certainly I have no doubt in my mind that now that we are out of that, we lived in an era of dreams that, as I said, that when we'll wake up, then everything will be beautiful and free and, everybody will live happily ever after. That was the Nehruvian dream. But that Nehru dream lasted very well for the time that Nehru was there, but not after that. So what we do with ourselves today is really of our own making. It's really like, how do young people say, like we've had our movements like say no to this hate, say no to this, right? Or we've said no to gender oppression. We've opposed, there's so many issues which young people have come forward, issues of sexual abuse in the professional spaces, right? So naming, so whatever it might be, this can only now, I think, be done. I don't see much hope coming from at an organized level, but I certainly think that from the universities and from young people and their movements, I think that is how we might be able to recover voices from, since we work with the past, recover those voices from the past, take that inspiration from the past, which can take us forward in meeting these challenges.
Thank you much, ma'am. Now that we have come to the end of it, ma'am, this was wonderful, and we would like to thank you for the very informative and interesting talk, and also to the audience for their patience. And now I would request Professor Shrikant Pandey, the convener of IQAC, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Maybe it's a ritual to offer a vote of thanks, but for me it's a privilege to have Sucheta talking to us and giving such a wonderful insight, the history, connecting with the present, how we moved from movement for our independence, which I believe she says that we continue to what Nehru used to say, tryst with destiny. We are still miles away from achieving that goal.
Yeah.
And she talked about everything which we cherished for and which we tried to formulate in the form of a constitutional, documented goals. We achieved a little bit, and there are still many things to be achieved. I believe that there is a saying in Hindi, जब तक आपको ठोकर नहीं लगती आप संभलते नहीं हो. Maybe the youth and we also, though we are graying in our lifespan, but we might have had enough of that ठोकर. The youth, as you were saying, that some movement may lead us to realize our cherished goals. I am hopeful that in future they will be able to compare the past and the present And in the dialectical process, we will achieve our goal when we synthesize this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shrikant. Pleasure to see you again. And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Shrikant. Right, so you're saying something.
Yeah.
Sucheta, thank you so much. It was something I thoroughly enjoyed, and I'm so glad students came up with some
very good questions. Very sharp, very good questions.
Yeah, very good. And I think it was your lecture that kind of
No, it's your teaching. Yeah, it's your teaching is amazing. And guys, join JNU. Come to JNU. We get occasionally students from college. Over the years, we do, but not so many. So please apply. It's easier to get in now because of the MCQ type of questions.
Ma'am, before we leave, I just want to request everyone to turn on the camera. Pratyush is asking, since it's online, we have to do with screenshots. So I request all the professors and my seniors and friends here to, if possible, if they could turn on their cameras so that we can take a screenshot. Pratyush. Pratyush, please let us know when we're done, right? All right, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. This was a wonderful lesson. It was a delight for us. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you to all the professors and everybody for being. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sucheta.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Nehru. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.